We need somebody to guide us through the world of what is, in many circles, the best farm system in all of baseball, and that is the Detroit Tigers. So we are going to talk all about that, their past, their present, their future, with Emily Waldon. Second time on Chris and Company. This is going to be a very fun episode. And as we obviously get deeper into the season and we're talking about September call-ups and where the Tigers are at, this is it's a perfect time to have her on because she has such a unique knowledge of not just what's behind the curtain with the minor league system, but also, her assessment of guys that she watched come up through the system several years ago, like Casey Mize and Tarek Skubal. I guess it was probably more than several years ago now. God, I'm aging myself, but she's wonderful. We're about to have her on. You guys can listen to that interview. But before we get to that, show notes at Castellani 2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok as well. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You can find us on audio form and Apple Podcasts. Find us audio form on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. And it's a wonderful site that is a backlog of all of our content. So check that out. Let's just jump right into it. I'm really excited about this one. Emily Waldon for episode 70. Let's do it. Emily Waldon joining us for the second time, this time for episode 70. And I think we got we picked a perfect time to do this because we've obviously had a lot of discussions about the Tigers farm system and about just the Tigers as a whole. And I feel like from now until probably for the next calendar year or more, the merging of the current farm system and the current major league team kind of becoming one is going to be a more likely possibility as we start to see guys come up to the system, and we already have. But first off, before we jump into any of that, Emily, hi, how are you?
Hello, my friend. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yes, and thank you very much for coming on again. As the Tigers, as the time of this recording, the magic number is 13. But I do want to start with what has been as successful a year in the minor leagues across the board for the Detroit Tigers that I can remember in my lifetime. I mean, arguably ever. I mean, they've had a historically good season, not just with the development of players, but they're winning games. They're winning games down in West Michigan. They're winning games in Toledo. And, it's the second time this decade where the Tigers have been talked about amongst the best farm systems in baseball. Obviously, you go back to the time in which you had Mize and Skubal and Torkelson and Green coming up through the system. But this, in many ways, feels different with the way that they're developing players. I'll just kind of start you off with a big one. Is this the best farm system in baseball right now?
Oh, that's heavy. I've been getting that question a lot.
Yeah.
I would say I would put them top 3 at the moment. Just knowing what I know about what some of the other teams are putting together. The Brewers especially, they've started to get some really good buzz for their farm system. Someone who's kind of fallen from grace, if you will, a little bit, which surprised me, is the Padres, who have been known for having a very strong farm system. So they've sort of, petered off a little bit. But with the Tigers, this is my 11th year, 10th season, taking away the pandemic year. By far, without question, the best I've ever seen this farm system.
And I think, the organizations that you bring up there with the Brewers and obviously where the Tigers are at, I think that it is so much different because you have an organization that now has, over the last several seasons, shown an ability to develop the talent that they have, whether it's the talent that Scott Harris inherited. I mean, there's certain organizations that I feel like you can just bank on, regardless of where they rank in the farm system rankings, to turn out talent year in and year out. I mean, the Astros have been at the bottom of the farm system rankings the last several years, and it seems like they still find a way to find guys. I think the Tigers are in that place right now, but obviously the golden piece of not just the Tigers farm system, but depending on who you ask, all of minor league baseball right now is the ridiculous, the remarkable Kevin McGonigal. And it's one of these things where I don't you know how sometimes if you have a friend who sees a movie that he really likes and he comes back to you and tells you, "Oh my god, dude, you got to see this. It's the best movie in the world." Like, and then you see it and you say, "It was just good," but you kind of hyped it up a little bit too much. I have that concern with McGonagall where I feel like I'm almost doing that to the fan base and putting these expectations so ridiculously high, but the numbers are gaudy and impressive, just not just in the his ability to drive in runs and his ability to hit for power. The statistic I love, 52 walks and 40 strikeouts in the minor leagues. I mean, there's really good prospects that come up through the system that strike out a lot. I mean, this guy's ability to his eye at the plate is ridiculous. With him, I mean, there's so many different tools to choose from. What would you consider his most elite tool? What do you think it is that separates him from the other prospects, really in all of minor league baseball right now, and has allowed him to emerge as one of the top prospects in the game?
Oh, hit tool,
Yeah,
easy. His hit tool, and this has been backed up by every single scout I've spoken to. I was talking with someone from another organization's front office, and we were talking about picking, players of the year for different organizations. And he said, if someone were to pick anyone other than McGonagall, it's not even a conversation. He goes, this is by far the purest hitter that I think we've seen in minor league baseball in quite some time. And that really does speak to the Tigers because of the fact that at one point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Nick Castellanos was one of the only homegrown players that they had in their system as a whole.
yeah.
And this is an organization that did not have a reputation for developing homegrown talent. But now you're starting to see the Casey Mizes, the Tarek Skubals, the Riley Greens, all of these guys who are building up to the major league roster. They're all homegrown. So you definitely have to credit the Tigers on that front because they've really come a long ways in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's interesting how much things have changed in the sense that I think Harris, there was this perception at the time, given the way that things were going at the big league level, that the cupboard was kind of bare. And I think what we realized very quickly was, no, there was honestly kind of a surplus of talent that existed within this organization. There just wasn't the ability to necessarily develop it. And I think that we've seen the progression of Carey and Riley and a lot of these guys, prior to the injuries, Parker Meadows and the guys that are coming up. And yeah, I mean, it's as hyped as people have been for a prospect in a long time. But with McGonagall, what's interesting to me is like he just basically stepped onto a minor league field and started hitting. And pretty quickly in the process, while he was never somebody that was an afterthought, I mean, he was, first round pick, he rose very quickly. And the question I've tried to ask other people is, I've heard two things mainly about McGonagall. One is even the Tigers were surprised that he fell to 37. And two is that you have a bunch of teams that are kind of kicking themselves for not, taking him first time around, that he had first round talent or top 30, top 20 talent. What was it that led to him falling to the Tigers? Like, look, first round, you got to be legitimately talented, but what were the things that people looked at and felt like maybe he's not worth taking a flyer out on in the first round?
A couple, I didn't hear many, but a couple of the ones that stood out, some people questioned his defense.
Yeah,
They said he was a little bit shaky defensively. Some people felt like his hit tool might have been a little bit overhyped. But really there wasn't a glaring reason that I was told. And one of my favorite things I think about Kevin is the fact that he's so young. I mean, just turned 21 just a
yeah,
couple weeks ago, maybe. And this is such an old soul when it comes to baseball. He reminds me, Tigers fans will appreciate this. He reminds me of an Ian Kinsler
love
type,
Kinsler.
where he goes on the field and he just wants to play. He is gritty. He'll talk trash, he'll chirp, he'll do all those kind of like the old school things that you want to see guys do that has more of that old school baseball feel to it. But very reserved, but incredibly cordial, very kind. But at the end of the day, and all of his teammates will say the same thing too, Kevin just wants to play. And this is the first year, once he got through his ankle issue, came back. This is literally the first year we have seen him at 100%.
Right.
And so I think the fact that up until now we hadn't seen that, it almost sort of delayed a realization of what he is capable of in comparison to some of the guys that we were seeing more consistently.
Yeah, and I think that just from everyone I've talked to, his bats like almost superhuman ability to find the barrel at way, and his swing decisions as a whole, and it's something I brought up before. It's the ideal Harris prospect because he's not only a very good hitter, but has an ideal feel for the strike zone, and the walk strikeout ratio obviously compares to that. You mentioned obviously, McGonigal and the experiences that you've had with him. And I remember when the Cubs won the World Series, which was, God, time flies, but about a decade ago, 9 years ago, Theo Epstein had a comment that I found really interesting where he said, back in the early 2000s, like kind of in the Moneyball boom era, there were certain teams that had access to data or were paying attention to things analytically that other teams weren't paying attention to. And now at the time, with 2016, the modern age, everyone kind of has access to that data. And so he pays more attention than he ever has to the personal and mental makeup of a player. When in the modern age of talent evaluation, how much stock do you put in like the way that a player comes across to you when they're not on the field, and just in general, like how their teammates see them, how the managers see them? How important is it to you?
Makeup is a huge part of it, and I actually will have scouts reach out to me about certain players, and they'll say, "What's his makeup? What's his family like? What's his background? What's it?" Because all of that stuff is gonna tell you, is this a clubhouse guy or is this just a bat or is this just an arm or what's his resume? And I think the value of what makeup brings to an organization should be held in as high regard as the tools, because at the end of the day, yes, you want someone who's going to go out and help your team win games. That's the ultimate goal, which is, very obvious.
Mhm.
But if you have a toxic culture in the clubhouse, no organization wants that. And we've seen examples of this, with players in the past, almost getting passed over when they're clearly athletic, but because of some of that history that they've had, teams are going, I don't want that. We don't want that in our house. And so we're going to bypass that for obvious reasons. But I think the culture aspect has been a huge piece with the Tiger system too, because any level you go to, you talk to the coaches, you talk to the roving instructors, the players, every single level. And this is the first time in all of my years covering, every single level just garners so much praise from everybody involved going, I've never felt more supported. I've never felt more like family. I've never felt more like we have a winning culture here. And that is club wide. So definitely just a huge credit to the Tigers front office because that was a team effort. And a couple people told me specifically that some of their staffing decisions and changes, a nice way to put it that way, was due to the fact that they wanted people in that front office who were going to buy in and that they could buy into that culture, support that culture, speak life into that culture. And we're absolutely seeing the fruits of that right now.
Yeah, I think that it's a very unique thing that they've done where even though from a overall skill set standpoint, there's obviously a major difference between high A and major leagues. I think that they've done a very good job of making it all feel like one giant system. You're all part of the Tigers. It was a very interesting thing, like when during the heart of the Dombrowski era, if a guy was sent down or if somebody was called up, it was almost like this very foreign thing, like almost this kind of taboo thing. Now, I remember when I interviewed Justin Henry Malloy right before this season, he said when he was sent to AAA last year, AJ talked to him every day. And it's like, I think that that's such an important thing of being like, just because you're not on the 26 man, or at the time of this recording, the 28 man, doesn't mean that you're not a part of this. And I think that keeps guys very excited and prevents them from kind of getting in a place mentally where they feel like there's no road back to the big league level. I want to talk a little bit about the pitching because it's almost in a lot of ways the inverse of where they were at several, 6-7 years ago, where we lauded Mize and Manning and Skubal. And I mean, there were some forgotten what Faedo was there, and Funkhauser and Bo Burrows. And now we kind of exist in this age where it feels like the position players have kind of been dominating this system. Do you feel like there is elite pitching within this minor league system the same way that people believe there's elite position player talent?
Not currently.
Okay.
From what I've seen, I think There is definitely potential. Elite would be a strong word for me. And I don't think that it's tied to anything intentional as far as the shift from pitching talent to positional talent. Just from my experience in the years I've been around the game, especially watching how drafts operate and how the classes operate, it just seems to come in waves. You have waves where a draft class will be heavier with pitching options, or a draft class will be heavier with bats, or there's kind of different waves that come through. And I think what the Tigers are kind of in the position of doing right now is strengthening those areas. And obviously, with the trade deadline, there was some back and forth about could they have traded more position players because there are so many. Yeah, they probably could have. I mean, they had a lot of different options on the table. But what I think their goal was to try to fill some gaps at the major league level because of the position they're in to potentially make an impact in the postseason like last year. You've got to think about it at the big club. So there were a couple different routes I think they could have gone, but they're definitely way more position heavy right now with the potential of some arms making an impact further down the road.
Yeah, and for the record, I prefer that. It just pitching development is so difficult and it's so random too. I mean, we have a guy right now that I'll ask you about in a second, and Troy Melton, who was, prior to this year, I'm not an afterthought necessarily. He was, on the up and up, but now is like a valuable piece in that pen and will be presumably next season a valuable piece in that rotation. Kind of came out of nowhere, whereas there's some guys who are top guys that go through injuries. I think they have it. They have the right mindset with it, but that is who I wanted to ask about next. There's two guys in particular who I feel like have seen kind of a crazy ascension, and one of them is currently at the big league level with Troy Melton. What went right for him? What changed? It's not to say that he was ever putting up poor minor league numbers, but I feel like in the last calendar year, he went from a part of the minor league system to, a legitimate potential core piece for the organization. What went right for him?
From what I've been told, just with the contacts I've spoken with in regards to him, I think that it ultimately comes down to the Tigers' decision to really spread the entire sort of plan and blueprint for pitching from top to bottom. So I know we joke, we call it the Fetter effect, but it really is the Fetter effect. Robin Lund, his assistant pitching coach, who is an absolute genius, comes from a collegiate coaching background as well, for those who aren't familiar. And I think it really has come down to the fact that we talked about that same culture from the top down. They're also applying these lessons and methods from the top down. So then you've got a farm system who's completely uniform. You've got the same tactics that are proven to be effective in developing these guys. And that's really been the biggest takeaway, I think, with Troy specifically, because they have this ability. Chris Fetter and Robin Lund have an ability, and we've seen this with Will Vest. We saw this with, Bo Brisky, wishing him, obviously a speedy recovery and more arms, where prior to that, you would have never put those levels of effectiveness on those guys. And obviously they came out and you've got Bo Brisky throwing 100 miles an hour. None of us would have predicted that, but obviously we all saw it happen. So I think it comes down to that cultural development, getting everybody on the same page. And I think Troy was one of the latest examples of that.
What happened with Bo Brisky this year? Was it as simple as injury related, or was there something external that just they couldn't get right?
What I was told on that front, there was a little bit of mental that they were trying to sort of reshape. There have been a few arms throughout the system that have kind of come into that same thing. A lot of that we heard with Matt Manning, who's obviously now with a new organization. But the mental side of pitching specifically cannot be talked about enough. It can make or break a guy. I mean, he can have all this stuff in the world, but if you cannot get those pieces to click on a mental side, it just doesn't come together. And so I know a lot of the pitching coaches who I have spoke with have said that is a key focus for them, making sure these guys are staying sharp mentally, making sure they're staying supported mentally, that they're having those conversations. They're working these guys through their own individual journeys that they're facing right now. And now Bo's injury on top of it, very unfortunate because you could see him making progress.
Mhm.
But as we know, baseball is it's so unpredictable, and unfortunately, he was one of the latest cases.
It really was disappointing. I mean, you mentioned him throwing 100 in the postseason last year. Like they do not make the playoffs and they do not have the run they have without Bo Brisky. So the idea of both him and Foley essentially being non-factors this year is pretty shocking. Obviously, Foley injured even but before the season started. Talked about the Feder effect, and it's an interesting thing because the one thing I actually have come to almost, and he I'm sure he wouldn't like me saying this, but I've almost come to feel a little bit bad for Fett, just in the sense that I think that expectations were put so high after what was a historically great run a year ago, in which they came up with this plan, and AJ deserves credit for this as well. This pitching chaos plan in which you had every guy in the pen buying into the idea of they could pitch any inning in any game, and basically all of them pitching good baseball, whether it was Herder or Hannafy or Gunther or Vest or Brisky. I mean, take your pick. It was all hands on deck, and it worked. This year, obviously, bullpen as a whole taking a step back, and I've talked to people about it, and I think that it's when there's underperformance, so to speak, people point to coaching staff. I think it's much more complicated than that in this particular instance. Um, I guess just to kind of simplify it, why did it go so right with the pitching chaos and the bullpen work a year ago, where maybe it just hasn't gone as right this year? Is there a correlation, or is it as simple as baseball is just kind of random and guys have underachieved?
I would go with just baseball being baseball, and I don't think it's anything major that the
I agree.
coaching staff changed. I don't think it was, any huge shift of any kind. You know as well as I do, baseball just goes that way sometimes. You get the rush of injuries, you get the unpredictability of it, and that just seems to be kind of where they're at right now. And I think one of the things that excites me the most as far as arms in the farm system, there are actually, when it comes to starters versus relievers, there's actually more relievers that I'm a bit more excited about than starters. And so having some of those sort of deceptive finesse over velo guys, so you're not going to see the big fastballs. We've got one big fastball reliever. But other than that, it's a lot of the Kenny Surwas, of the world with the knuckleball that, I could talk about for hours. That side of it is really fascinating to me. So I think there's a few arms that we could be hearing more about in the next year or two.
Yeah, and I was gonna actually, I'm really glad you brought that up. But and for the record, it's so weird, expectations change thing. They have the number 10 ERA in all of baseball. It's not like there's been some massive team fall off. Like, you still get Tarek Skubal every fifth day, who's a homegrown guy. A lot, same with Melton and some of these guys that have stabilized things. So I do think at points it's been a little bit of over exaggeration and some bad luck. I think that what has made them so successful, and AJ's talked about this as well, is like, the best thing that a pitching coach can do or a coaching staff can do is prepare. And he's been open about the fact that he's never been around somebody who does a better job of preparing for games like Fett and Robin Lund do. And sometimes, you can have the plan you want. If guys aren't executing, they aren't executing. There's not a whole lot that you can change about that. I'm really glad you mentioned him. I had Kenny Surwa on this show last year after they signed him. And I remember talking to my producer being like, this is there could be a shelf life on this, because if he ends up becoming a story, we could circle back around on this interview and be like, wow, we got him early. And the one takeaway that I got from the Surwa signing, based on what people like you had tweeted about and based on kind of what I heard from the organization, was this was not some feel good, like, oh, shucks, we'll take a flyer out on him. It was, no, we see something in this guy and we think that he can be good. He's had a very good year in the minor leagues. First part of my question, how early can we expect to see him potentially at the big league level? And secondly, what kind of pitcher do you expect him to be? Because it seems like he's had a wonderful season.
He really has had a wonderful season. And I think what it comes down to is where the Tigers decide to put him. Because at the start of the year, he was only throwing a handful of innings here and there. And now, since he's gotten to the Eastern League, he's a full blown starter. And so if they decide to keep him in a starting role, he does have a max right now. And I asked him about if this has been a long-term thing or kind of a recent development, but he can go at least 6 innings. He said comfortably he can throw at least 6 innings. He's got a whole, as his catchers put it, a whole slew of pitches. Like I want to say he's got 5 or 6 pitches that he can mix in. So huge pitch mix. Obviously has the two variations of the knuckleball. He did tell me that the higher velocity one is still sort of a work in progress. He can get that one up to about 88 miles an hour, which for anyone who follows baseball, that's basically unheard of
Yeah.
to get a knuckleball up that high. And so the fact that he has that in his back pocket, I think it's really just going to come down to confidence. The more he uses it, the more he's going to tap into it. But he said he's just still kind of refining that feel for it as he goes along.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and it's something that I'm very excited to see, just because it's kind of it's this weird combination of new age and old age, where it's you have the knuckleball, but I think it was one of those things where the deal, the headline of the story was the knuckleball, but I'm glad you mentioned, like, he throws 5 or 6 different pitches. Like, that is a weapon for him, is not the specific weapon necessarily. Really incredible story, and so I am hoping that he makes his way to the big league soon. One other player that I wanted to ask about, who is I'm getting excited about now, who has been in the minor leagues for a long time, and I think is kind of similar to Wencel Perez a few years ago, just as kind of finding it, is Isaac Pacheco, who was second, I think their second pick in the 2021 draft. They liked him a lot when they drafted him. And, he's kind of been stuck in West Michigan for a long time. But now, I mean, I saw you tweeting about it the other night. His OPS right now is 200 points higher than it was a year ago at this time. I mean, this very much is a breakout year for him. If you could talk just a little bit, what does the future have in store for him, and how quickly, now that he's broken out, do you think he could ascend through the system?
It's really going to depend on the bat, honestly, because I think going back to our topic about the depth of positional talent that the Tigers have right now, something one executive told me, which always kind of stuck with me. He said, when it comes to your ability to make a big league roster or not, you just have to show us you can hit. He goes, the rest of it, we'll figure it out. If you can hit, we will find a place for you. Like, we'll stick you somewhere in the field, if that's what it takes. But something I think I've enjoyed the most about watching Isaac the last couple of years, he had an uphill battle with injury. He kept running into these fluky little situations, broke his hamate bone in his hand, had to have surgery last year, only played, I want to say 81 games, I think, last year.
Yeah.
Went into the offseason, worked with his hitting coach nonstop, restructured his diet. He told me he cut out eating out completely. So no longer eating fast food, toned up, moves better, works better, it tightened up his swing. I had multiple scouts telling me, they're like, that is not the same kid as I saw last year. They said that is not the same kid. And so I think the fact that he is willing to exercise every single option to find out what works, that's going to set him apart, because he's still just 22. People
Right.
are forgetting that he's still, I think he turns 23 in maybe like another week or two, if I remember correctly. But high school pick, this is a guy that is really finding himself and has had to work extra hard because he's big. He's got a big body, he's got long arms, long legs. And as we saw with Parker Meadows, that can take time when you've got those longer limbs that you have to tighten and sort of find your rhythm. And man, what a fun story. Just watching him succeed the way he has this year has been pretty special.
This is something, and I remember when I was fortunate enough to, and I think I'm hiding behind the photo, or yeah, there it is, the photo of me and Dan Hasty doing color commentary in West Michigan several years back, and this was right after Scott Harris had been brought in, I believe. And one thing that Dan said to me is that one thing the players had relayed was that now that there was a new regime, one of the big things was they knew what to eat now. And I feel like very often when I talk about this organization, one of the key things that is brought up organizationally has been the diet. And I find that very fascinating, because it's one of those I think attention to detail things that is there now that may not have existed in prior regimes, and I find that really interesting. Let's say I asked about the pitching. I think that's one thing that I've heard from some people. I'm not going to specifically say who, but I've heard is that Scott Harris and this organization as a whole is much more tight-lipped about stuff than they were in the Avila era. Avila, almost to a fault, was very media friendly. And I think that when it comes to what Harris is doing, he is a disciple of Theo Epstein, who is very similar. They try to work in the shadows, which generally, I mean, I have no problem with. But I think that it's allowed for Harris to kind of take it on this. He has this mystique now of like, you only see him every few months and he kind of pops his head in for the broadcast. And we've never really had him in a situation where he's like, and maybe the champagne celebration last year, but like where he's had his hair down or anything like that and kind of been opening up. But, I talked a little bit about this with Dan Hasty, and I want to ask you, what kind of interactions have you had with Harris in the time since he's been in Detroit?
So, fun fact, I actually have not interacted with Scott Harris.
Well, that adds to the mystique, I guess.
It adds to the mystique. And I think I can go more off of the people, the contacts that I trust who have interacted with him. And they've all sort of spoke to the same, that he is private. He wants to keep, sort of his blueprint that he's working off of to himself and to his staff, and put a product from that blueprint on the field for the fans to see. And obviously, he hopes it's a blueprint that the fans are going to like, because you want to put a winning product on the field. Every team does. So yes, he's definitely more private, more kind of keeps things close to the chest. But we're seeing the product. That's the thing. We're seeing the product on the field. We're seeing the development pieces come into place. And I think that's what speaks the loudest.
Yeah, and I even Greenberg as well. It's funny because he did an interview a few weeks ago on MLB Network, and I had to tweet. I'm like, this is the first time I've seen this guy speak. And look, honestly, there's a lot of good that comes with that, because it means they're working. Like I don't need them, going on every radio show or TV show, but it is fascinating. One thing, just kind of transitioning back to the minor league system here, just for a second. A big thing that we've seen in Major League Baseball over the last, it's probably coming up on a half decade now, is players receiving contracts before they've played Major League games. I think the big push has been, understandably so, getting homegrown players for their prime years. Tigers did it with Colt Keith, in Jackson Churio. Corbin Carroll had played a little bit, but it was only 20-something games. I mean, it's been kind of viewed as the way of the future, so to speak. Is that something that you see continuing, or do you feel like the evaluation for players is difficult enough that to give somebody a contract before they've even played a major league game is almost playing with fire?
I personally have never been a fan of oversized contracts when it comes to the amount of years.
Yeah.
Just because we have seen that blow up with multiple players throughout the years. And I think if you're looking at, say, with Detroit, if Detroit were to offer Kevin McGonigal an extended contract, would not be one bit surprised. That's a talent you want to build around. You look at the Roman Anthony's with Boston, you look at the Jack Cagliones with Kansas City, you look at these basically franchise players that you say, that is a guy that we see being a fit for our culture. He's a fit athletically. His product speaks for himself. This is a guy who's going to help us win for a long time. Why not? So I think it absolutely makes sense, but not something you're going to see handed out too freely. I think it would have to be a specific profile for it to make sense. And that's really up to the discretion of that front office.
I would agree. I'll take it one step further and say I think very, very rarely are we ever going to see it with pitchers. I think that this is almost exclusive to position players at this point. That does create an interesting dynamic, because it feels like a lot of the big contracts, both of the past and also coming up, and with Tarek Skubal hitting free agency, are pitching related. And I think that that's often because teams are a little bit more hesitant to sign guys when they're young, because of arm blowouts, pitching injuries, and it's a unique thing because anytime you hear contract extension, I think people in baseball immediately assume it's something massive. You hear it with Colt Keith all the time. Hey, they gave him an extension before he played a game. Well, Colt's making less than $5 million. Like it's not. And look, righteous bucks, but it's not like they've decided to throw $200 million at him. I think that it's a really great opportunity for, not to say Detroit's a small market, but for teams in smaller markets to be able to sustain or maintain franchise players for a long time. Because I do think, and we're kind of sort of going through it a little bit with Scuba right now, it is really unfortunate when you have a guy that comes up through your system that you draft when he's 18, and in the back of your mind you're thinking he'll finish his career as a Met or a Dodger or a Yankee. So I think that it's a unique thing that they're doing, and I've talked about it with McGonigal in the past, it being a possibility. He's reaching the point, I could be very wrong, where it's almost like, and we saw Pete Crow Armstrong did this during this most recent season, where he received an offer and said, no, I'm going to bet on myself because I think I could probably make a lot more money here. Like I almost worry about that with McGonigal. Is like if he's as good as advertised, like he might wait it out a little bit to get some more bucks, but we'll see. Last person I wanted to ask about, because and I think even the last time I had you on, I asked you about this pitcher, because I just find his career arc very interesting, is Casey Mize, because obviously very highly touted coming out of Auburn, and I actually kind of feel bad because this has been Casey's best professional season in baseball. He's done a lot of things right. Made the All-Star team. He's won 13 games. And people can talk about wins and losses. That's a legitimate achievement for him. I mean, I don't think he'd even had double-digit wins combined in all of his seasons at the big league level. But the biggest selling point with him was his splitter and how good it was coming out of Auburn and how good it was in the minor leagues. And it is, in terms of run value, rated as one of the worst splitters or just pitches period in baseball this season, in a year where he's had his best season with a coaching staff that's well talked about and it has a great reputation, in an organization that does a pretty good job with their pitchers. I've every time I ask this question, the general response is kind of an I don't know, but why hasn't he been able to consistently find that pitch at the big league level?
I think it just goes back to that jump between the college level and professional baseball, and what could be that effective at that level may not necessarily translate with the same bite. I think we saw that with Alex Faedo with, you have to excuse me on which pitch it was. Was it a
It was a slider, because he had that
slider? That's what it was.
swing and miss slider at Florida. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that one again, we heard so many rave reviews of how effective that pitch was in college, and when he got to professional baseball, it didn't have the same bite that was advertised before he came to the organization. So I think it comes down to the fact that players almost have to rediscover themselves when they get to professional baseball, because what worked as a high school player, in the case with Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, even Josue Briseño, who is still just 20. These guys have to rediscover themselves at a much more elite level of baseball, still be able to maintain their position, and they've got 50, 75 guys banging on the door behind them who are ready to take that spot if they can't keep up this level of playing. So it's really a personal journey, I think, for all of them. And it goes back to that mental side of it too for pitchers. What worked once might not necessarily translate the way it did before. And it's about how you stay in that mental space that's going to help you be that effective.
What was your assessment of him in the minor leagues? Because I feel like it was, obviously he was the highest, touted of the guys that was coming up. I feel like by the time they got to AAA, there had been kind of a shift about like this Scooble guy might, he might be the legit one in this rotation. Did you see a potential ace level pitcher, or did you feel like where he's at right now, which is the ceiling of like a solid 3 starter, was more likely his calling?
I think as time went on further, he did start to lose a little bit of that edge. He was still effective, not to discount the way he performed, was still effective. but just didn't have that same edge to him. And I think we saw the opposite with Scooble, just because Tarek told me back at the early part of his career, even, he goes, I didn't have the same command. I didn't have the same velocity. I didn't have the same bite to my pitches. I didn't. He went through this whole list of stuff, and he was a pro at that point. But it was that process of cultivating it and going, oh gosh, yeah, I was maybe a ninth round pick, but I could potentially win, the Cy Young and the Triple Crown because that's what he had inside of him. But nobody saw that. And I think unless you're able to really tap into what you're capable of, in the case of Tarek, you see that incredible evolution. But then with the success that you kind of have at the college level, it may not translate the same. And so it could shift your position going further into your career. And I think we're seeing that with Casey, despite the success he's had this year, because he really has had a good year.
Yeah, and it's more so just the focus on that pitch, because I find even when he's pitched well, it's been the trouble with the splitter, and he's been open about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
With Tarek, I think that's it's like the ultimate Detroit story that appeals to people in the sense that the stuff always existed. I think he benefited in a bizarre way from being undervalued and having the injuries, because his stuff just got increasingly better from year to year. And I think, he's a very, very cerebral guy. Like, he's a very analytically minded pitcher, which, I mean, given the fact that he can throw like 102, you feel like he doesn't have to be, but he does. He does a great job preparing for each start. I really think towards the end of 23 was when that changeup became the swing and miss pitch that he could go to really in any 2-strike count and be able to punch guys out. And I think that when you firmly have that swing and miss pitch at the big league level, that because you'll probably have it at the minors, just beating guys with heaters, which is what he was able to do. I think that's when he really came along. And a few more kind of interesting things I wanted to ask, some of them Tigers related, but now I know that you are a Detroit sports fan, just a sports fan in general. And I find it interesting. I was talking to somebody about this today, where as much as I love my Tigers, when I watch baseball, I try to, like, metaphorically speaking, kind of stroke my chin when I'm watching the game and take it in. Like, I like the science and the artistry of the sport. And even if my team loses, like we just played the Mets and lost 2 out of 3, I love Juan Soto. I love watching his at bats and breaking down like why he's taking this pitch and kind of the mental game of it all. Whereas, like, I'm a huge college football fan, and when Michigan's playing Ohio State, I'm straight lunatic. Like, I'm screaming, I'm yelling, I want to win. As somebody who is an assessor of talent and an evaluator of talent, do you evaluate other sports the way that you do with baseball, or do you kind of wear a different cap, so to speak?
It depends on the sport. I think it depends on the sport. I think if there were to be a sport that I do tend to break down a little bit more, it would probably be football.
Hmm.
Just watching, I've been on a big kick with watching how quarterbacks operate.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from. I think it was a Josh Allen thing. When
Hmm.
I started watching more of Josh Allen's games and then sizing him up, so to speak, with a Patrick Mahomes, and then talking about, the ageless Aaron Rodgers who just won't ever stop playing,
Yeah.
or, the Tom Brady's or whatever. But watching the way that they operate, watching some of these different positions and the timing and the footwork and the mental preparation of it. And other sports I tend to just watch, which is kind of nice. It's
Right.
something where you can just enjoy the actual sport itself. But I think of the ones that I do watch, it tends to be baseball and football.
Yeah, and I think the quarterback position, the evaluation of the quarterback position, is the closest thing there is to baseball evaluation. Just in the sense,
Hmm.
you look for intangibles, you look for the big arm, you look for mobility, but there's guys who have all that and still don't necessarily succeed at the biggest level, just because there is there is a brain element to this. Like, Brady never had the biggest arm, or he definitely couldn't move, but like, he read defenses better than anybody. So I do understand that for sure. I mean, I even made the analogy with Bryce Underwood in Michigan last week, where it's like he's got a rocket fastball. He's just got to command it. Like, it's very similar to kind of what you see at the major league level. One more farm system related thing, because the Tigers obviously, I think, are putting themselves firmly in as good a position as an organization can be where they have a very competitive major league product and a really highly thought about farm system. But what is currently in Major League Baseball a team that is not having a ton of success at the big league level that you feel like is due for a breakout because their farm system is loaded with a lot of good young talent?
Oh, that's a good question. My first gut was going to say the Brewers, but the Brewers are obviously doing a lot of things right at all levels. I think one that's probably, I would say that's probably impressed me the most this year is actually Cleveland. And I
Yeah,
know Tigers fans are not going to want to hear me say that, but
they always find a way though.
they do. They always find a way. And I was telling a scout the other day, I said, I find it ironic that no matter how, and a Guardians fan was telling me this too, we find it ironic how no matter how the teams are doing, no matter what their records are, no matter what the state of things are, those two teams always struggle against each other. It's always this combination of rivalry, and one team could be superior by numbers, but the bottom could fall out when they play that other team, and that's just the rivalry aspect of it. And the cool thing that I've seen is I see that same rivalry trickle down to AAA Columbus, AA Akron, High Lake County with West Michigan. The success that West Michigan had this year, I was talking with Peyton Graham, who is with the West Michigan
Yeah.
Whitecaps right now, one of their infielders,
Former Oklahoma Sooner. I remember watching him
former
in,
Oklahoma
in the
Sooner.
College Series. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's somebody who I could talk about too as well. But he told me, and he was very careful. He said, no disrespect to Lake County. He said they obviously they're doing things, but he said on paper they should not be able to beat us. But it
Mm.
didn't matter how many games West Michigan won this year. It seemed like every time they'd come up against Lake County had their number. And it made zero sense. But that goes back to that rivalry aspect. And I think that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah, and I would say to expand beyond that, even though I can't speak on their farm system necessarily, but a team that I think is just having watched them, I think is close, and it's tough because they're in such a bizarre place organizationally. I really like the Athletics young core. I think that they've done a really good job with those guys. Some of them highly sought after guys. Some of them that I feel like are just going to be kind of glue pieces. But I like that lineup a lot. I think that it is a bizarre situation to be in because one, you're playing in a minor league park, and two, it's a minor league park where that is like just under Colorado in terms of like the ball flying out. I mean, you literally had Luis Severino saying like, I regret signing here, and I don't know how they're going to be able to find or develop pitching. But I think that's an organization that I think is starting to trend in the right direction. Like I said, I can't necessarily speak on the quality of their farm system, but I think they have some good young talent right now, and even lock some of it up. Brett Rooker going to be there for a while. Last one, and this is a perfect time to ask this because they kick off Sunday. Final record prediction for the Lions.
Oh Lord. Oh gosh. I'm so scared to do this because I'm so superstitious. I'm so superstitious.
Oh yeah, no, I totally understand. In general,
Oh
I'm not.
gosh.
Yeah,
It's such a tricky question because I think it's going to be another dominant year. I really do. I think they have the right pieces in play. I think it's going to take a minute for the coaching staff to really kind of find their rhythm once the season gets started. Um, but I'm going to say postseason. I mean, they're going to make the postseason at
I agree.
least, and I don't know if I can do an actual record. I'm so
No, that's fine.
superstitious with this team.
I get though. I do that same thing with the Tigers too, where it's like there's so much variance too. I mean, it's just like
So much.
if there's an injury here or there, if they, like if what if they are as healthy as they were 2 years ago? They'll probably be great. What if they're as banged up as they were a year ago? Well, then things might go sideways. So you never really know. I will say, and I'll tweet this about the Tigers forever, and I'll do the same thing with the Lions. Really, every team in Detroit. Like the fact that we now exist in this age where playoffs is an expectation, like awesome, because there was a time where seasons were over by week 4. So like anything, it's the same thing right now with the Tigers. Like whatever struggles they've had in the second half, this is a very good time for Detroit sports. So Emily, as always, you've you've continued to make a name for yourself and do a wonderful job. We appreciate you coming on. We'll make sure to link to all your socials and everything. Make sure to follow her on all platforms. But this will definitely not be the last time that we will have you on. But for the time being, we very much appreciate you coming on once again.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
That was fantastic. And not only was it fantastic, but we had probably another 10, 15 minutes off the air, discussing stuff that, we hadn't, it wasn't even brought up. So we will definitely have her on in the future. She's as well respected as any guest that we have. Follow her on all of her socials. And if you're looking for updates on the Tigers farm system, really the Tigers in general, I don't know if there's a better social media account to follow. She's just been an absolute machine and a badass as well, cancer survivor. So shout out to her. Thank you very much to Emily for coming on. That will do it for today's show. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are available on TikTok as well. That is continuing to grow. We're trying to get to 10,000. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We're available in audio form on Spotify, so you can check us out on those platforms. And CastellaniContent.com. Gorgeous site, updated all the time with the content that Austin and I create. It will be updated today with today's episode of Chris Company. We will be back next week with, and I'll say this, we got some great content coming this weekend. We have Michigan against Oklahoma. We have Michigan State, Boston College. We have the Tigers in a series against the White Sox. This should be this is a wonderful time of year, just straight up. Oh yeah, and the Lions kick off their season on Sunday, so we're gonna have plenty to talk about. And I'll say this, and we will see you for that come Monday morning. Appreciate all of your continued support. I will talk to y'all again real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger. World Series bound and picking up steam. Go